level of mass destruction! Shirts and hoodies, available through Teespring, link in the description.
Shadowverse.
Shout out to my good friend the Metatron, who has just released a video that goes so awesomely in-depth into the armor of Outlaw King. The Metatron has a far greater understanding of the specific details regarding medieval and historical armor, and is able to share a huge number of things that I wasn't able to cover. So please do go check out his video, it is awesome. There'll be links in the description below. Greetings, I'm Shad, and welcome to my review of the fighting and combat from the movie Outlaw King. Now, I've already reviewed this movie overall, looking at its historical accuracy in the weapons, armor, clothing, and also events, and I was honestly very impressed with the specific historical details they added into this film. It was overall a far more historically accurate movie for the medieval period than other ones I've watched by far, but that does not mean it is not perfect. There were some criticisms I had, so if you want to see and know what those are, please do go check out my full review. But like I said, in this video, we'll be looking at the fighting, and regarding the fighting, unfortunately, this is another area where the movie falls short in a fairly big regard. So we're going to be looking at the two principal duels between Robert the Bruce and Edward II, and in between those two, we will look at the larger battle overall.
What would you say to a duel right now? Like old times. Here's, fetch him a sword. It's unfortunate you had some sentimental notion.
So already we have a little bit of an issue here. They're saying they want to do a duel, and then they grab the swords that they're just carrying on their side. Now, for a casual duel that isn't to the death, which this is supposed to be, they would not use sharp swords. Those things are very deadly, and it only takes a small, accident, someone to miss their block or something like that for someone to die, and they don't want that to happen. So if this was real, they wouldn't use their real swords, they would use wooden stand-ins. But anyway, we'll move on from that fairly large mistake that they did there and have a look at the fighting itself.
Fighting for the people. It's understandable.
So, a playful, cheeky, not too honourable little snipe at the sword to disarm him, no complaints really there. If you see your opponent not holding your sword in a strong grip, it is a viable technique to just strike the sword to knock it out of their hand.
Not a good start, Bruce.
Watch yourself, brother.
Endearing, even.
So the duel has just begun, and the big problem that we see here is that neither swordsman actually took a proper stance. Edward kind of raised the stance before a strike, but he throws it at Bruce.
Hello, my name is Bruce.
Hello, Bruce.
And Bruce has to just raise his sword into a block. But let's look at the distance that Edward has to his opponent, Bruce here. If he fully extends his sword here without moving forward, the strike he's about to make actually won't be hitting Bruce at all. And this is a major inaccuracy that so many movie sword fights do, where the sword strikes are not aimed at the opponent, they're aimed at the opponent's sword. And I think we're going to see a lot of that in this fight. Yep, 2 strikes right to Bruce's sword. He's not aiming for Bruce at all. Okay, those next 2 strikes were closer, and they were aimed at Bruce. But what we see what's happening here... Yep, the cliche of having the swords crossed and the opponents pressing their weight against each other. If you've ever studied real historical swordsmanship, this rarely ever happens, because as soon as the swords get in the bind, and that's what this is called, what we're seeing here, they are in the bind, it is a massive opportunity to follow up with so many other maneuvers. If Bruce moves to his right into a hanging guard and then swings his sword down, he has a clear, direct path into Edward's gut or legs, and he'll be able to keep his sword in a guard position that whole time, protecting himself from Edward. Bruce's guard is a bit low here, and so if he doesn't raise it any higher, if Edward was to step back and straighten his sword so it is now horizontal, he could strike Bruce right in the forehead with a really solid strike. So what we're seeing here, Bruce's guard is too low, and they're not following up with so many creative things that they can do from the bind. It's a static Hollywood sword crossing thing, which is just so unrealistic.
I just wanted to win.
So, William Wallace.
So they're circling each other, and again, no proper sword guard position, but we do see them adopt one right now.
Last rebel standing.
Okay, finally, we have at least a half-decent guard position, and what they're doing is actually quite accurate and a good swordsmanship maneuver. They're basically feeling out each other's guard and strength, okay? By placing the swords just on each other, touching, you can feel out what pressure the opponent might be pushing the sword in and where he might move it as a result. So crossing the swords like this is actually a more legitimate swordsmanship technique. But Edward's guard is a bit too low. If Bruce was to lunge forward and snipe at Edward's left hand, it's quite open there, and then all Bruce has to do is move a bit to his right, and he can keep out of range of Edward's blade. So Edward's guard isn't that great, but Bruce's one it's not bad. He's got his sword more fully presented to his opponent to be able to guard and deflect any strikes that come in. But now the question is, will they hold these guard positions? Because in swordsmanship, you need to adopt guard positions, proper swordsmanship stances, and we haven't really been seeing any of that so far, but do they keep this? Okay, so Bruce kind of kept his sword raised there, ready to defend against Edward's attacks. That is good. And slapping aside a very committed forward lunge, but Bruce doesn't capitalize on it. You see how far Edward lunged forward? Then his back was completely open. And so Bruce had just slapped aside the sword, sweeping his sword right ways across his body, but if he used that same momentum to just swing the sword around into a strike to Edward's back, it would have been game over right there, but he doesn't follow through. He just slaps it aside and then withdraws. Now what we see here, Bruce does not have a proper guard position up. He's fully open. And so it seems like Edward is getting ready to capitalize on that and strike at the open position. But having said that, this can kind of be a type of guard position, but a lower guard position, kind of inviting the opponent to strike at the upper body. I mean, it's really not a stance. He doesn't have his feet grounded properly or his sword in the correct position, but it's close-ish to the guard position known as the fool or fool's guard. You keep your sword in a lower position, ready to be raised into a guard or attack, depending what your opponent does. Wow, that was a wide baseball bat swing. I mean, he's not using two hands, but do you see how open he is? Now, if Bruce was using a proper fool's guard here, he leant back out of range of Edward's attack. All he'd have to do, if he adopted fool, because look, he's now out of his guard. Like I said, he wasn't really in fool's guard at all. But if he was, and he had kept that guard proper and had moved back out of range of Edward's attack, all he has to do is raise his sword, and look how forward Edward is leaning. He's presenting his face to Bruce. Bruce could have just sliced his head in two if he wanted to in this position. And it shows how untrained these swordsmen are, but they're not really swordsmen, they're actors. But still, it would be nice if they did some proper choreography here, because this sword fight is a mess. There are times when you might want to do a really wide swing, and that is usually if you need to commit a lot of power to it and you see your opponent not in a proper guard to follow up. Kind of like what, Bruce has done, admittedly. But in most situations, when you do a strike, you want to end in a guard position where you can either block, defend, or follow up with another strike. And so a lot of effective attacks will end with the sword pointing forward or presented or some way like that, but rarely, like I said, there are exceptions, but rarely would you end, especially being open like this. It is sloppy and just horrible swordsmanship. And again, we see no follow-through here. Bruce just fully withdraws, no guard position at all. So if Edward actually wanted to win this, he wouldn't have withdrawn. He would have pursued Edward, pressed his advantage, and strike again. And because Bruce had no guard position, then Edward could have struck him.
How much have you had to drink?
Not nearly enough.
Keep the heads, Robert.
They say he lives in Selkirk Forest. Some consider him a martyr.
Again, Edward's kind of stance is has his sword half raised. It's not a real stance. It's very sloppy. But even if we consider what he's doing here, very poor. He is presenting his left arm more forward than his sword, which is held in kind of a weird downward position, which is not complementary for attacking or defending from that position. Again, no follow through, and that did look a bit more like it was a bit closer to Bruce. And Bruce, no stance, just a few engagements, and he just withdraws, leaving himself open.
Others are madmen.
So that looks to be the second time Edward has done this kind of low thrust thing, okay? Leaving his upper body so open, like it's a really bad forward thrust. There's no protection to his upper body, and so we see Bruce here just slapping the blade aside, and then Edward completely open, just like before. If Bruce followed through, he could strike Edward at that. Look, Edward is completely open. His back is fully exposed to Bruce. This is starting to hurt, okay? When you really break it down, this fight scene is a bit painful to watch. But it looks like Edward is again posed to do another strike. This seems like a very similar set of movements like that engagement we saw just before. Okay, no, he doesn't follow through with a strike like before. But again, no guard position.
What do you think?
Strike to the sword. That low strike didn't look to be aimed at anything, and according to the positioning, Bruce could just bring his hand down right onto Edward's head, because again, Edward isn't holding a guard position. But no, their swords are just gonna clang and cross. Bruce was legitimately aiming for Edward's sword then. We saw Edward was completely open on his upper half. His head was exposed. Bruce's arm was already raised. And he could have brought it down right on the head. But no, he aims for the sword. And now we have another Hollywood sword cross position where they can exchange dialogue when there is actually so much you can do from a bind like this. Instead, they talk. Yeah, they just have a bit of conversation and a weird pressure play of pushing a sword in and no one's... Yeah.
I think he's a man who loves his country.
Now, I understand you need to use fake and, of course, blunt swords in filming because you don't want to actually injure anyone, but gosh, it is painfully obvious here. Like, see that flat edge there? Impossible to miss. Like, they could at least try and make it look sharp. And this type of bind position where they're pushing so hard against each other's blades and slowly moving is just so stupid. From this position, Edward could just sweep his sword down and strike into Bruce's gut, and with the pressure Bruce is pushing down, Bruce's sword would just push Edward's sword down with it and push Edward's sword into his own gut as a result. It's very annoying.
Fought with his life.
So interesting there was a strike, missed, they're very close to each other, so they've grabbed each other's arms, right? Which is a grapple. And that's actually not bad, okay? Many a sword fight and duel can actually fall into grappling with the other opponent's arm or sword. The problem is, Edward is grabbing Bruce's upper arm. He's not actually holding the wrist, so Edward can still move his arm, you know, from the elbow. He isn't actually being held properly in place. He could easily just bring his sword inside in between Edward's arm and slice down from his face and his chest. Bruce actually isn't being held at bay, but Edward is. See, Edward is being held at the wrist, so Bruce has far more control and is applying more restriction onto Edward's sword hand than Edward is on Bruce here, but Bruce is acting like he's being held completely at bay, which no, not from the leverage that Edward has on him.
Diplomatically put. Or we'd have to kill you all.
Yeah, Edward was aiming at air. Nothing there. He wasn't even aiming for Bruce. But even if he was aiming for Bruce, Bruce lunges aside. No guard position, but still, have a look at where their swords are positioned, okay? Edward is fairly in a fairly good position to bring his sword down against Bruce, so Bruce would be forced to defend against it. But Bruce is in a really good position to defend against Edward's strike and strike in one motion, one tempo. Do a thrust or an upward cut into Edward's midsection, but raising his hands higher than the position of the blade, so the blade would still be angled down, which would then protect and guard against any strike that Edward can place against him. An attack and defense in one motion. But, of course, he's not going to do that, is he? No, he just does the biggest, widest baseball bat swing against Edward's blade. Now, this part is kind of interesting because sometimes, as I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, there are situations where you want to do a really powerful strike against the opponent's blade itself, which essentially is what they're trying to say happens here, because look how off balance Edward is. All Bruce would have to do is follow through again. See the position of his sword? Just swing it up, around from his back, and then down, right onto Edward's back. He would have to pursue Edward with a pretty, wide, long lunge to get in range, but he could do it. Yet still, he just does not follow through. No, instead, he just disengages once again, and look, Edward is still technically open to Bruce. He hasn't turned around, put up a guard position, his back is closed. Interesting. This is the second and one of the only other semi-guard positions we see in this entire fight scene. Bruce essentially raises his sword into the roof guard position as we understand it in HEMA. There are actually other names depending on what discipline you follow, but anyway, roof. So have a look at Edward's posture here. You can clearly tell what movement is about to do based on his position. It's quite the large telegraph. He's getting ready for a strong forward lunge, which is suicidal based on what Bruce is doing right here if Bruce was ready to capitalize on it. Bruce, he just needs to withdraw his legs and body and bring his sword down right onto Edward's head, because in every single thrust Edward has done here, it's been a low aimed thrust. And so far from actually needing to defend your legs, you could just move them out of the way. Wow. That thrust wasn't even aimed at Bruce at all. It was aimed at thin air. So Bruce actually brings his sword directly down onto Edward's sword, right past Edward's head, which had nothing protecting it. He could have cleaved Edward in two right then, there. Fight well and truly over. I mean, they're not trying to kill each other, but this is why you would be using practice swords, so you can actually land a hit and not kill your opponent. Alright, some just more sword slapping here. Nothing special, no guard positions, and it doesn't look like they're aiming for each other either. And this is where the sword fight ends. So Bruce was just doing some heavy attacks against Edward's sword. So overall, this sword fight was horrible. It was bad. It was very, very bad if you were to analyze it from the perspective of actual real swordsmanship. This is horrible. But let's see if any of the other fights of this movie will be any better. Well, I don't have much hope. But okay, we'll look at the main battle scene at the end of the movie. I just wanted to show you that. This is a different fight scene in the movie, but that's actually one of the coolest moves in the whole movie. It had, like, that strike had power behind it. It was taking advantage of an opponent's open position, his gut, and, Bruce looked to be on the back end, but spins around with a big strike like that. Pity not much of the other fight scenes have good choreography like that exchange just there. Let me just say that overall, okay, when you're not really trying to nitpick every single detail, this battle is very enjoyable and engaging. It's visceral. The guys are really getting into it. And with the difficulty it must have been to film something like this, I actually, this battle in and of itself, I do have to give 2 thumbs up. They did a great job, but we are going to go into the finer detail and assess many of the smaller elements. It's not to rag on the battle as a whole, because, as I said, I actually like the battle. The sword fight at the beginning was horrible, but this battle, yeah, it's very engaging to watch.
Take the day!
Okay, so, large cavalry charge here. Can you pick out what's wrong with it? There's like something of profound inaccuracy, wrong, like something very wrong about this large cavalry charge. How many lances do you see here? I can't see one. Not a single knight on his horse is charging with a lance. They're all just holding swords. Oh my goodness. Swords are a backup weapon, okay? Not the primary one, especially for a battlefield like this. And especially for them on horseback, okay? These knights should be using lances. Alright, so I like the strategy that the Scots are employing here, because this is actually what the historical record says what the Scots did, you know? Dug a ditch, filled it with spikes and stuff like that, and had marshland on either side. So this is a decently enough-ish accurate depiction of the Battle of Loden Hill. Still, there are issues that we're seeing here and there, like lack of lances and things. Nice spear wall, ready to just skewer the English cavalry charge, but of course the English, they would have done a little bit better if they had lances. Bruce using a spear, good to see.
It's a trap! It's a trap!
Now, as to arrows striking right through, soldiers' mail, look, arrows have a decent enough chance to get through, but not in every instance, okay? Mail and Gambison padding underneath actually have a decent chance to stop arrow fire as well, but generally, in movies especially, arrows seem to get through mail all the time. Whoa, that was a big hit. Look, I think that was mainly done for cinema. I'm not sure if you could hit someone with so much power that you would lift the guy off his horse completely, but my goodness, that looked cool. And let's just appreciate the fact this guy is using a weapon that is not the cliche sword or something like that. It looks to be, what, a glaive or a bardige? Or bardiche, as some people pronounce it. Alright, so Bruce just hacking through mail like it doesn't exist. He is using an axe, okay? Like I said in my main review, an axe has much higher chances of getting through mail than a sword, definitely. But it's being shown here like there's no resistance at all. Right through mail like it's nothing. And that was with a sword. So, yes, that is a lightsaber moment. Lightsaber! 1. Oh, that looked like it was a strike through mail as well. There's a sword. That's 2. Oh, I like that one of the protagonists takes a hit, okay? He gets fully knocked off his feet. And that was a solid hit. I really moved from that, so good choreography there. That was hard to tell if that was a strike at the guy's foot or if it went through the mail on his legs. So I don't think we can count it as a lightsaber. We're still on 2. Though we do see his sword guard being bent at a fairly high angle there, showing that, they're clearly made of rubber. But you don't notice it unless you kind of pause. Is that a repeat shot from the strike that we see before? But again, axe through mail, it's harder to count those as a lightsaber. This is the same scene as before, just with a different camera angle, where Bruce hits someone in the back and then in the gut. Oh, look, yeah, I didn't notice from the first 4 times I watched this fight, so obviously they can get away with it. That strike didn't look to have gone through the mail, yet the guy that got hit is really rearing back like it was a death blow. Well, that was through mail, but I think that guy's actually using a warhammer. Actually, it's a warhammer with a spike, so that could go through mail, yet still, the mail is not showing much resistance with strikes like that. I'm reluctant to call it a lightsaber because it is the right type of weapon to get through mail. Was that a strike through mail? It's hard to tell. Can't call it categorically. Still, on a battlefield like this, you would not be wanting to use a sword. I mean, you could use a sword against, say, that guy right here, is wearing Gambison stuff. There's a good chance you could get a sword through that with difficulty, because Gambison was still effective armor, but against mail, sword is a bad pick in this battle. Hang on. That was a strike to the guy's midsection in mail and is still standing. That was a strike being protected by our... I told you, even in the main review, that we do see strikes ineffective against certain armors and stuff like that, as we see here. So thank goodness. And honestly, this is one of the few moves I've seen where they, even though they're showing armor doing nothing in some cases, at least there are times where they show armor actually working. And like we've just seen here, thank goodness. That was another strike against his mail that did nothing. So the armor is doing something. Those are big points. Sorry, that was pretty good. Like, in the context of the fight, I wonder if, like Douglas is like, 1 strike, 2 strike, I'm not getting through the mail, stuff it, I'll just pummel him and smacks him in the face with their fists. Well, the other strikes weren't working, so I love it. That's great. Sorry, awesome line right there. And Douglas, the character of this film, He does an awesome job. It's great.
Douglas!
That was a strike to the head, alright? And so when you use a sword and get a solid strike against someone, even with padding, okay, that can really do some damage. But it looked here that the strike was actually on the opening side, the front part of the male coif, hitting him right in the head. So not a lightsaber, that was striking in an open area to the guy's armor. Yes, it works. Okay, so one strike to the shoulder, which looked like it drew blood. The sword wouldn't get that, but the follow-up strike with the sword was to the guy's head, so that would kill him. And that is obviously the death blow, so I won't count the first one as a lightsaber either, which means we're still only on 2. This is like a very low lightsaber count for, you know, these type of medieval movies so far. Yeah, hard to tell that one. Can't call. And he's using a big axe, okay, so even if it does get through mail, I can't call a lightsaber on an axe like that. Get totally mowed down by a horse charge. Thumbs up. That's great. It's an axe. I gotta give it to him, okay? Another cavalry charge with nary a lance in sight. Hitting with a warhammer. That'll do the job. That strike actually isn't being shown going through the mail, yet the sheer concussive force of a weapon like that, hitting someone right on the back, even if they have mail and it doesn't go through the mail, that could still break someone's back. I don't think a guy's going to get up from it, so yeah, I think it works. Axe strike to someone's neck. Yep. Okay, he takes off his helmet. It didn't even look like his helmet was knocked off, which is okay, if it gets knocked off in the thick of battle and you don't have time to put back on, we could let that slide, but it actually looked like he took it off. Now, we know why they have that, because there's a fight between the main antagonist and protagonist, and they want their faces to be seen, so it's more cinematic and stuff like that, which is why he took off his helmet. But in a real battle, you would never do that, especially in a battle as thick as this. You would never take off your head protection. So Douglas here is using 2 swords, but a lot of the death blows he's landing on his opponents are hits to the head. And of course, male coifs are open on the front, so I can't say that these are lightsabers. There's actually using the swords, you know, a level of effect you would need to, if you're using swords on a fight like this, aim for the open areas. Look at that face. That's great. I gotta give this guy props. He does this role really well. And just so you don't know, like, I didn't pick this out the first time I watched it because the beard and the acting was also really good. This is Quicksilver from Avengers Age of Ultron. And you also might know him from the movie... Look, I'll just say kick butt, alright? I like to keep colourful language out of my videos for the most part. But that scrawny guy from Kick Butt, okay? That's him! So, the fact that he's acting the role so well that I couldn't even pick who it was, he's doing a good job. Yeah, that looked like a strike to the head. We didn't see it land, but it seemed to be aimed very much to where the guy's head would be. Was that a dagger? Like, it didn't look like a sword. And a small dagger, okay, has much better chances, especially if it's thin, to get through the mail. So, I'll give that kill a thumbs up as well. No, sorry, I love it. Like, that just shows the brutal, visceral nature of what battles could be like. It's just kill your opponent, like, grab a shield and pummel him to death with a shield. So there are some really, like, golden moments in this battle overall, and already we're seeing far more accurate kind of kills and deaths in this battle than not. We only have 2 confirmed lightsaber hits in this fight scene, so can you see why I really like this battle? Except for the lack of lances on the horses, that was, yeah. Axe to the back again. He's using an axe, so thank goodness. Oh, no, wait, is he using... No, it's a sword and an axe. Okay, so he's got a sword and an axe at the moment. Okay, so he gets an axe into the chest. Now, this... kind of fight, like sword to the face, okay, where there's no protection. Of course, that would kill someone, but then it goes right through the male, like it goes through his head completely. So it must have missed the spine at the back of the side of the spine because it looks a bit low. It's not like it's hitting the skull. And then it also goes through the male behind it with a sword. But it's not going through male to kill the opponent. The actual death blow is, on the front, there's no protection. The back, so I actually can't really call this a lightsaber kill because the kill is legitimate and realistic, but the bursting through the male on the back is far less realistic. It's showing that male is effective. But still, if you're going to get through male, it's with a thrust and not a cut. So that makes it more plausible. Not a lightsaber kill.
Retreat! Retreat! Go with it here! Get out! Save yourself! Retreat! Robert!
Alright, and here we come to the letdown of this battle. Look, the battle is technically over, so I can judge it separately to the fight scene we're about to watch now. And the battle was brilliant, really, really good. But this fight scene that we're about to watch, I call it the Battle of Baseball Bats. But it's not really, it's a fight, it's a duel of baseball. It doesn't sound as snappy. Battle of Baseball Bats. Why? Well, just wait and see. Okay. No guard positioning and just really wide, wild swings. I can kind of give a little bit more lenience in my criticism here because they've just been fighting and they're exhausted. Though, in all honesty, Robert the Bruce would be 10 times, well, he should be 10 times more exhausted than Edward. Edward came in towards the end of the battle and we didn't see him doing much fighting, but we can assume he did some. And so perhaps we can say they just don't give a stuff about fighting, with proper stance, guard, and everything like that. Though we saw that in the previous fight, they didn't care about it then either. So it's not a matter of being exhausted that they don't care. They just don't have the skill or training to do it right. But they are really showing that they're exhausted, so they're just hitting wildly at each other. Interesting thing here, their choreography, it's still as bad as the other fight, but it's being done in the same way. What do I mean? Well, the Bruce is trying to defend himself and block Edward II's attacks, but there's a very big difference between this fight and the first one. They're wearing armor, okay? And so a sword, especially with cuts, and especially with the Bruce wearing a coat of plates, it's not gonna get through the armor. So in a real fight, if you're protected in armor like this, Robert the Bruce, he could have just let those, because they're cuts, and again, cuts very ineffective getting through armor like this, let those cuts land, it'll do nothing, and the Bruce can just cleave Edward's head in two with a light swing because he doesn't need to worry about blocking. Fighting in armor is a very different beast to fighting when not wearing armor. You have to defend yourself with a sword, with the blade, defending, parrying, riposte, and all that fun stuff with a sword, not wearing armor. When armor, you can let hits land and not worry about them. Movies do not take this into consideration. This fight is still very much, even though wide baseball bat swings is like a duel with the swords crossing and defending. It would be great to see a movie show proper fighting in armor. And there's some movies do kind of do this, like the fight between Lancelot and King Arthur in the movie Excalibur, where Lancelot actually half swords. That's what these guys would want to do. They would want to be half swording right now. Wow, that was a wild swing. A lot of power behind it, just try and hit them. Bruce isn't aiming for Edward. That strike wasn't even aimed. It was like Edward didn't need a block and it would have missed completely. I know choreography and all that stuff, but for a realistic duel, no, this is not. Okay, that's one of my favorite parts of this fight scene right here. 2 solid hits against the opponent's armor, which do nothing because they're swords. Swords are not going to chop through mail. Love it. Great to see. Yep, big 2-handed baseball bat swing. And then they land with crossed swords. Instead of using any type of maneuver that you can do in the bind, Bruce just... They cross swords, they press against each other, and then he just pushes Edward's sword away. So, I actually don't hate that last engagement, alright? Bruce does a swing, Edward tries to deflect, Edward gets off balance, is moving backwards, and finally Bruce presses his advantage because now Edward is off balance, is pushing forward, and then Edward trips over, which, that does happen in real sword fighting. I've seen it, and it's even happened to me. Getting off balance, and if your opponent pushes the advantage, you can fall right on your butt, which happens, and with that, this fight is over. And Edward is completely at the mercy of the Scots here, and they let him go. They let him go. So stupid. Why? Why has this movie done that? Oh, gosh, because they wanted a fight, a very underwhelming fight. They could have cut this fight and the movie would still be awesome because that battle was awesome. To have a great battle and then a crappy sword duel like this between the protagonists. Look, it might have been better if the sword fight itself was better, but the choreography was messy. It wasn't a realistic sword fight at all. And then Ed's trapped them into this horrible situation where Edward is defeated and of course, Edward wasn't captured historically, so to be kind of true to the historical, narrative, they let him go. But what they could have done, because they've thrown realism out the window by having Edward escape here and not the Scots catching him. So if they're going to do something that stupid and bad, they might as well have broken this historical element here and capture Edward and have Edward be the prisoner exchange to release Robert the Bruce's wife, which of course happened much later, and it wasn't an exchange with Edward II himself. But like I said, if they're doing something this stupid, they could have actually made something less stupid and slightly historically inaccurate, but it would have been a far better result than them letting Edward go here. My goodness. So there we go. This has been my in-depth fight review of the Outlaw King. And so, as we have seen, the sword duels, very underwhelming. A lot to be desired in those fights. But the battle was brilliant. We only saw 2 lightsaber moments, and most of the kills were realistic, visceral, engaging, a lot of action and movement happening. So the battle was brilliant, but the sword duels were pretty pathetic. Yet still, I don't think they ruin the movie, especially with so many other historically accurate elements in it, like their weapons and armor and the clothing and the actual regard to very specific historical details. Outlaw King is still one of the most historically accurate medieval movies I have watched. So thank you for watching, I do hope you have enjoyed, and of course, I hope to see you again. So until that time, farewell.